The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the room, each sound a painful reminder of time slipping away. Ava's fingers trembled as she held his hand, the warmth fading with every breath he took. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice breaking. His gaze, weak yet full of love, met hers. "Promise me, you'll carry on." Her heart splintered. How could she? Yet, with tears in her eyes, she nodded. She had no choice. Comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, like, and share, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The room was dark now, a few weeks since that promise. Ava stared out of the window, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. It had been a blur of grief and guilt, of promises made and promises broken. How could she go on? How could she live the life he had wanted for them both when she felt so broken inside? The pain of his absence haunted her every step, each moment reminding her of the vow she'd made. A vow that now felt heavier than her heart could bear. Ava had always thought she was strong. She had always thought that love was enough to pull through. But what if it wasn't? What if the love they shared could no longer be enough to heal the wounds left behind? Every corner of her life now seemed to remind her of him. His laughter, his dreams, their plans. They had spoken of growing old together, of creating a life full of memories. Yet now, she was alone, carrying the weight of a broken heart and a promise she feared she couldn't keep. And then came the day when everything changed. Ava sat in her small apartment, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, when the doorbell rang. At first, she hesitated. She hadn't had visitors in weeks, not since his passing. But something stirred in her, something that made her rise and open the door. Standing there, looking more serious than she'd ever seen him, was Matt, the man who had once been her closest friend. He had been there for her, through thick and thin. But now, his eyes were full of a darkness that unsettled her. "Ava," he said, his voice low, almost apologetic. "We need to talk." They sat down, the silence thick between them. Ava's heart raced, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Something in Matt's expression told her this wasn't just a casual visit. "I know you're still hurting," Matt began, his voice breaking slightly. "And I know you promised him that you'd carry on, but Ava, I think you need to know something. Something you don't know." Ava felt her stomach tighten. Her mind raced, unable to comprehend what he meant. What could possibly be more important than the promise she had made? "Matt, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Listen," Matt said, taking a deep breath. "I'm not saying this to hurt you, but there's something you need to know about your fiancé, about the man you loved." He paused, as if the weight of his next words was crushing him. "There's something about him that you don't know. Something that will change everything." Ava froze. Her heart skipped a beat. The air in the room felt heavier now, and she could barely catch her breath. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why are you telling me this now? After all this time?" Matt's eyes were full of regret, but his voice was steady. "Because the truth can't be buried forever, Ava, and because you deserve to know." The room was silent for a long time after that. Ava could feel the pieces of her world slowly beginning to unravel. Matt's words echoed in her mind, and the more she thought about them, the more the weight of what he was saying pressed down on her. What truth was he talking about? What could she have possibly not known about the man she had loved more than anything? Matt's next words hit her like a freight train. "He wasn't who you thought he was." Ava's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "He had secrets. Secrets that he never shared with you. Things he hid, even from me. Things that, if you had known, would have changed everything." The floor beneath Ava seemed to tilt. How could this be? How could there be a side to the man she loved that she had never seen? Had their love, their relationship been built on lies? Ava stood, pacing the room. Her heart beat faster, the confusion inside her growing with every passing second. She needed answers. She needed to know the truth. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I need to know, Matt." And that's when Matt told her the truth. The secret that would break her world apart. Ava sat there, her mind reeling from Matt's revelation. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process what he had just said. Her fiancé, the man she had promised to carry on for, had been hiding something so dark that it could change everything she thought she knew about him. She looked at Matt, hoping for some clarification, but all he did was lower his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Ava could feel the heat of betrayal rising in her chest, making it hard to breathe. How could she have been so blind? How could she not have seen the cracks in the facade he had built around her? "Tell me what you know, Matt," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Tell me everything." Matt hesitated for a moment, then began to speak, his words heavy with regret. "He wasn't who you thought he was, Ava. He had debts, lots of them, and not just financial ones. He was involved with people, dangerous people. He promised he was getting out, but I don't think he ever did." Ava's mind swirled as she tried to absorb the information. Her fiancé, the man she had loved with all her heart, had been leading a double life. He had promised to the world, but behind her back, he had been drowning in secrets. The thought was too much to bear. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, feeling a pang of anger rise within her. "Why did you wait until now to tell me all of this?" Matt's eyes flickered with guilt. "I didn't want to hurt you. You were already going through so much. But I can't keep this from you anymore. You need to know the truth." Ava stood up, her hands trembling as she wiped away a tear that had fallen without her realizing. She had always trusted him, believed in their love. But now, that trust felt like a distant memory, shattered into a million pieces. She walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The world felt different now, darker. The person she had loved, the one she had promised to carry on for, had been living a lie. And now, in the silence of her grief, she had to face the painful truth. Days passed, and Ava found herself consumed by the secret that had been revealed to her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the man she had loved so fiercely. And yet, now she could only see the lies he had hidden from her, the promises he had made, knowing all along that he had never intended to keep them. Her grief had turned into something darker, a rage that simmered just below the surface. How could he have done this to her? How could he have betrayed her trust so completely? But as the days turned into weeks, Ava began to realize that the anger, while justified, was not enough. She couldn't let the truth define her. She couldn't let his lies consume her completely. She had made a promise to him, and she was determined to keep it. Not out of obligation, but because it was the right thing to do. She would carry on. She would find a way to live, to honor the love they had shared, no matter how painful it was. But as Ava made this decision, another truth began to settle in her heart. Her grief, her anger, her pain, they all had a place in her journey. But she could not let them control her. She could not let them dictate her life. And that's when she decided to take a step forward, even though it felt impossible. She would not let the secrets he had kept from her keep her from moving on. She would find her own path, her own way to heal. Ava's decision was not easy. She knew there would be moments of doubt, moments when the pain would feel unbearable. But for the first time since his passing, she felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny flicker of light in the darkness that had consumed her for so long. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew that she had to keep moving forward. She had to. The days after Ava made her decision were not easy. The weight of her grief still clung to her like a heavy blanket, suffocating her at times. But as she pushed through each day, she found moments of peace. Small moments where she could breathe, where she could remember the love they had shared without the bitterness that had begun to cloud it. She began to take small steps, joining a support group for people who had lost loved ones, picking up hobbies she had once enjoyed but had abandoned. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress. And as the months passed, Ava realized that she had not only kept her promise to him, but that she had also made a new promise to herself. She would survive this. She would heal. And someday, she would find a way to love again. Not because she had to, but because she deserved to. Ava's story was one of pain, betrayal, and ultimately, resilience. It was a story of a woman who had been broken by the man she loved, but who found the strength to pick up the pieces and rebuild her life. And though she could never forget the past, she learned that the future was hers to shape. The promise she had made to him was still alive in her heart, but it was no longer the thing that defined her. As Ava moved forward, she carried with her the lessons of love, loss, and the power of the human spirit. And though her journey was far from over, she had taken the first step towards healing, and that was enough. Ava's world had become a strange place, one where everything felt foreign. Each step she took was heavy with uncertainty. Her life, once filled with the warmth of shared dreams, was now a void of unanswered questions. But in the stillness of her sorrow, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in months, a spark of curiosity. She had always been a woman of action, of purpose, and now, with the world feeling so unsettled, it was time for her to take control. She couldn't keep hiding behind her grief forever. It was time for a new beginning, even if it was small. The decision came unexpectedly. It was a rainy afternoon when Ava picked up the phone and made the call she had been avoiding for so long. "Hello, Ava?" The voice on the other end was familiar, but sounded different now. So much had changed in her life, and so much had changed in him too. It was Matt. I need to know something," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of nervousness in her chest. "I think it's time. I need to know the full truth, not just the bits and pieces that I've heard." There was a long pause on the other end. Ava could almost hear the weight of the silence between them. "Are you sure?" Matt finally asked, his voice tinged with hesitation. "You don't have to do this. You've been through enough already." Ava took a deep breath. "I can't live in this half-truth any longer. I need the whole story, Matt. I need to know what really happened. I need to understand why." Another silence hung in the air, but this time it felt different. It was as if Matt had resigned himself to the fact that there was no turning back. "I'll be there in an hour," he said. The time between that phone call and Matt's arrival felt like an eternity. Ava sat alone in her apartment, waiting, her mind racing through endless possibilities. What could Matt possibly have left to tell her? What new pieces of the puzzle would he reveal? When the doorbell rang, Ava's heart skipped a beat. She opened the door slowly, the air thick with anticipation. Matt stepped inside, his face drawn, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something softer, almost sorrowful. "I'm sorry, Ava," he said quietly as he entered, his voice heavy. "I know this isn't easy, but I'm here because you deserve the truth." Ava nodded silently, motioning for him to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured them both a glass of water, though her eyes never left him. The time had come. Matt took a deep breath before he spoke again. "You asked for the whole truth, and I don't want to hold anything back anymore. I'm not proud of what I'm about to tell you, but you need to hear it. You need to understand what was really going on." He paused, clearly gathering his thoughts, but when he spoke again, his words hit Ava like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just the debts. It wasn't just the people he was involved with. There was something deeper, something that even I didn't realize until it was too late. He was involved in something dangerous, Ava, not just financially, but emotionally. He was hiding something from you, and I don't think he ever intended for you to know. Ava's heart raced as Matt continued, her mind struggling to process what he was saying. She had always thought that love was a bond of trust, that it was unbreakable. But now, it felt like everything she had known about her fiancé, everything they had built together, was falling apart. "He loved you, Ava," Matt said softly, his voice filled with sorrow. But he had his demons. He was running from something that went beyond just the debts. It was a past he couldn't escape. And in the end, he thought he could protect you from it. But it destroyed him instead. Ava's world was spinning. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, like she was walking through a fog, unable to see clearly. She had never imagined that the man she had shared her life with could have been carrying such a burden so dark that it ultimately destroyed him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why wait until now?" Matt's eyes were filled with regret. "I didn't want to hurt you, Ava. I didn't want to add to your pain. But I see now that keeping it from you was a mistake. You deserve to know the truth, no matter how hard it is." Ava sat in stunned silence. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but they were not the pieces she had hoped for. They were jagged, sharp, and painful. Her fiancé's secrets, the ones he had hidden from her, now lay bare in front of her, and she was left to pick up the shattered pieces of the love they once shared. The next few days were a blur for Ava. The truth was still too raw, too fresh. She felt as though she were walking through life in a fog, unable to see clearly. Her grief had shifted from mourning the loss of her fiancé to mourning the loss of the person she had thought he was. But as the days passed, a new clarity began to emerge. The weight of the truth was still heavy, but it no longer defined her. She had heard Matt's words, felt the devastation of the betrayal, but she was determined not to let it consume her. She had been through too much, and she would not let this break her. Ava's decision was not made lightly, but as she began to rebuild her life, one small step at a time, she found strength she never knew she had. She started volunteering at a local shelter, pouring her energy into helping others who were struggling with their own pain. She took up painting, something she had always loved but had never made time for, and she began to forge a new path, one that was hers alone. Though her past would always be a part of her, Ava knew that it was no longer in control. She was taking back her power, reclaiming her life, and finding peace in her own journey. As the weeks turned into months, Ava's life began to feel less like a shattered puzzle and more like a canvas she could repaint. The initial numbness had faded, replaced with moments of clarity and strength she hadn't realized were there before. But even as she began to heal, there were times when the weight of her past still crept into her thoughts. It wasn't easy to forget the man she had loved, the promises made, and the betrayal she now carried with her. But one thing Ava knew for sure was that she had to keep moving forward. The darkness of her grief and anger could no longer hold her back. It was time to step into the light, even if that light was dim and uncertain. One afternoon, as she sat at a cafe reading a book, a familiar face walked by. It was Rachel, a close friend from her past, someone she hadn't seen in years. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Rachel's warm smile brought a sense of comfort, reminding Ava of who she was before everything had changed. "Is this seat taken?" Rachel asked, her voice full of warmth. Ava smiled, surprised at how much she had missed this. "No, not at all. It's good to see you." Rachel sat down across from her, her eyes scanning Ava's face. "You look different," she said gently. "I don't mean that in a bad way, just stronger. How have you been?" Ava paused, feeling the weight of her answer. How could she explain what she had gone through? How could she express the turmoil and the quiet strength that had emerged from the ashes of her old life? "I've been changing," Ava said finally. "I'm trying to. It's hard, but I'm getting there." Rachel nodded, understanding more than Ava could say. "You know, I've always admired your strength, Ava. I know it's been rough, but you've come so far, and I'm proud of you." For the first time in a long while, Ava felt a surge of pride in herself. She had been fighting so many battles within, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be proud of her own resilience. "I'm trying," Ava replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, but I can't stay stuck in the past. I have to move on, even if it means leaving behind everything I thought I knew." Rachel smiled softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Ava's hand. "You're not leaving everything behind. You're just making space for a new chapter, and I'll be here for you every step of the way." Ava's heart warmed at her friend's words. It felt good to hear someone else acknowledge the struggle, to understand that she wasn't just getting over it all, but truly rebuilding from the ground up. It wasn't long before Ava realized that moving on didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. What it meant was learning to live with the scars and finding a way to embrace life again, even if it felt different than before. There were still hard days, days when the grief would hit her like a wave, knocking her down when she least expected it. But there were also days of peace, days when she could look at herself in the mirror and see someone who had survived, who had come out of the darkness with strength and grace. And then there were the days when she finally started to feel alive again. The moments when she remembered what it was like to laugh without it feeling forced, to wake up and face the day with a sense of hope. Ava had started to let herself dream again, not of the past, but of the future. A future where she could love again, not in spite of her past, but because of the strength her past had given her. One evening, as she walked along the beach, the cool breeze brushing against her face, Ava felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She stood at the water's edge, watching the waves crash against the shore, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was simply existing. And in that moment, Ava realized something that would change everything. She didn't need to seek validation from anyone else, not from her fiancé's memory or from the expectations of others. She only needed to find peace within herself. It was then that she understood the true meaning of her promise. The promise she had made to him all those months ago wasn't just about carrying on in his absence. It was about finding her own strength. It was about moving forward, with or without him, and living the life she deserved. She had kept her promise to him, and now it was time for her to make a new promise to herself. She would live, she would love, she would be happy. And as Ava stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she knew that the future was hers to shape. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but it would be hers. And that was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Ava's life began to feel less like a shattered puzzle and more like a canvas she could repaint. The initial numbness had faded, replaced with moments of clarity and strength she hadn't realized were there before. But even as she began to heal, there were times when the weight of her past still crept into her thoughts. It wasn't easy to forget the man she had loved, the promises made, and the betrayal she now carried with her. But one thing Ava knew for sure was that she had to keep moving forward. The darkness of her grief and anger could no longer hold her back. It was time to step into the light, even if that light was dim and uncertain. One afternoon, as she sat at a cafe reading a book, a familiar face walked by. It was Rachel, a close friend from her past, someone she hadn't seen in years. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded away. Rachel's warm smile brought a sense of comfort, reminding Ava of who she was before everything had changed. "Is this seat taken?" Rachel asked, her voice full of warmth. Ava smiled, surprised at how much she had missed this. "No, not at all. It's good to see you." Rachel sat down across from her, her eyes scanning Ava's face. "You look different," she said gently. "I don't mean that in a bad way, just stronger. How have you been?" Ava paused, feeling the weight of her answer. How could she explain what she had gone through? How could she express the turmoil and the quiet strength that had emerged from the ashes of her old life? "I've been changing," Ava said finally. "I'm trying to. It's hard, but I'm getting there." Rachel nodded, understanding more than Ava could say. "You know, I've always admired your strength, Ava. I know it's been rough, but you've come so far, and I'm proud of you." For the first time in a long while, Ava felt a surge of pride in herself. She had been fighting so many battles within, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be proud of her own resilience. "I'm trying," Ava replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, but I can't stay stuck in the past. I have to move on, even if it means leaving behind everything I thought I knew." Rachel smiled softly, reaching across the table to squeeze Ava's hand. "You're not leaving everything behind. You're just making space for a new chapter, and I'll be here for you every step of the way." Ava's heart warmed at her friend's words. It felt good to hear someone else acknowledge the struggle, to understand that she wasn't just getting over it all, but truly rebuilding from the ground up. It wasn't long before Ava realized that moving on didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. What it meant was learning to live with the scars and finding a way to embrace life again, even if it felt different than before. There were still hard days, days when the grief would hit her like a wave, knocking her down when she least expected it. But there were also days of peace, days when she could look at herself in the mirror and see someone who had survived, who had come out of the darkness with strength and grace. And then there were the days when she finally started to feel alive again. The moments when she remembered what it was like to laugh without it feeling forced, to wake up and face the day with a sense of hope. Ava had started to let herself dream again, not of the past, but of the future. A future where she could love again, not in spite of her past, but because of the strength her past had given her. One evening, as she walked along the beach, the cool breeze brushing against her face, Ava felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She stood at the water's edge, watching the waves crash against the shore, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was simply existing. And in that moment, Ava realized something that would change everything. She didn't need to seek validation from anyone else, not from her fiancé's memory or from the expectations of others. She only needed to find peace within herself. It was then that she understood the true meaning of her promise. The promise she had made to him all those months ago wasn't just about carrying on in his absence. It was about finding her own strength. It was about moving forward, with or without him, and living the life she deserved. She had kept her promise to him, and now it was time for her to make a new promise to herself. She would live, she would love, she would be happy. And as Ava stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she knew that the future was hers to shape. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be perfect, but it would be hers. And that was enough. As the days turned into months, Ava slowly began to embrace her new reality. She was no longer weighed down by the ghosts of the past. Instead, she was learning to navigate life with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The pain was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it no longer had the power to control her. One morning, as she sipped her coffee in the quiet of her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Matt. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since their last conversation about her fiancé's secrets. Ava hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. "I know it's been a while," Matt's message read, "but I wanted to check in on you. I've been thinking about you and just want to make sure you're okay. I know it's been tough, and I've been a part of that, but I'm here if you need someone." Ava stared at the message, her heart beating faster. The bitterness that had once consumed her began to bubble up again, but this time, it wasn't as overwhelming. She had spent so much time angry at him, at everyone who had kept her in the dark, that it felt strange to even think about forgiving him. Yet, something inside her knew that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened. It was about freeing herself. She typed out a response, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed send. "I'm getting there, Matt. It's been hard, but I'm okay. I appreciate you checking in." The message felt like a small step forward. She wasn't ready to forgive him completely, not yet, but she was learning that forgiveness was a process. It wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It would come in its own time. Ava's journey had never been about erasing the past. It had been about finding peace despite it. Slowly, she started to rebuild her social life. She reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating again. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she felt like she was dishonoring the memory of her fiancé, but she knew that living in the past was no longer an option. One evening, while out with friends at a local bar, Ava met someone new. His name was Ethan. He was different from anyone she had ever dated before. Calm, grounded, with a warmth that made her feel at ease. They spent the evening talking, laughing, and sharing stories. Ava didn't expect anything to come of it. She wasn't ready to jump into a relationship, and she knew that. But as the night wore on, she realized something important. She wasn't afraid of moving forward anymore. Ethan wasn't a replacement for her fiancé. He was simply someone who had walked in her life at the right time. She didn't have to carry the weight of the past into her future, and for the first time, she felt like she could give love another chance, not out of necessity, but out of choice. As the weeks passed, Ava and Ethan's friendship deepened. They went on casual dates, took long walks in the park, and shared simple, quiet moments that were full of meaning. Ava began to realize that love wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. And in Ethan, she had found someone who didn't need her to be perfect. He didn't expect her to have all the answers, and he never pressured her to be anything other than herself. It was then that Ava fully understood what it meant to move on. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending like it didn't matter. It was about allowing the past to shape her without letting it define her. She could love again, but this time, it would be on her terms with someone who appreciated her for who she was, not for who she had been or what she had lost. The true healing came when Ava realized she had built something for herself that was stronger than any promise made to anyone else. She had created a life rooted in self-love, in growth, and in the understanding that she was worthy of happiness. The journey wasn't over, but it was hers to continue. One day, as she sat by the lake, watching the water ripple gently against the shore, Ava closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The past no longer haunted her. It had become a part of the fabric of her being, woven into the person she had become. She had made it through the hardest part, the beginning. Now, she could face whatever came next with strength and grace. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the water, and Ava smiled to herself. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding from the world or from herself. She was living. She was free. And for the first time in a long while, Ava felt a sense of peace settle within her heart, knowing that she had not only kept her promise to him, but she had also made a new promise to herself, to live fully, without regret, and with an open heart. Months passed, and the seasons changed. Ava's life began to unfold in ways she hadn't expected, but felt right. She had grown in ways she couldn't have imagined when she was lost in her grief. Each day was a step toward a new version of herself, stronger, more self-aware, and more open to the possibilities life had to offer. Her relationship with Ethan blossomed. They weren't in a rush, taking their time to build something solid. Ava had learned that love was a quiet thing, something that grew with patience, with understanding. She wasn't seeking the dramatic passion she had once known. Now, she longed for something steady, something peaceful. And in Ethan, she found that. But even with the peace that settled in her heart, there were moments when the past would come rushing back. There were nights when she would dream of him, the man she had once promised to carry on for. The dreams were not filled with bitterness or anger anymore. They were quiet, filled with the soft warmth of memories that had faded into the background of her life. She no longer woke up with a sense of loss, but with a sense of gratitude for what they had shared. One day, while at the park with Ethan, they were sitting on a bench, watching the sunset. Ava's thoughts drifted back to the days she spent in pain, trying to make sense of it all. She had come so far, yet there was a piece of her heart that still held on to the past. "Ethan," she said softly, turning toward him, "there's something I've been thinking about." He looked at her, his eyes gentle, as if he could sense the weight of her words. "What is it?" "I'm just realizing how much I've changed," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Not just in the way I love, but in how I see myself. I used to think that I had to live in the shadow of my past. But now I understand that I can carry the memories and still create something new." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm and comforting. "You've always been strong, Ava. I think you've always known that deep down." Ava smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I don't know if I always knew it, but I know it now. And that's enough." They sat together in silence, the weight of the moment settling over them. Ava felt no need to explain everything, to say everything she had been through. With Ethan, she didn't need to. He understood her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. It was at this moment that Ava realized she had come full circle. She had found the peace she had sought for so long, not in the absence of pain, but in the acceptance of it. She no longer saw herself as the victim of her past. She wasn't defined by the betrayal or the heartbreak. She was defined by the strength she had found in the aftermath. The promise she had made to her fiancé had been fulfilled, but now she had made a new promise, one to herself, to live, to love, to forgive. As time went on, Ava began to use her experience to help others. She started volunteering at a support group for people who had gone through similar losses, sharing her story, offering guidance, and listening when others needed to speak. It wasn't always easy, but it was fulfilling. She found that the more she gave, the more she healed. Her heart had expanded in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer afraid of the future. There was a sense of hope within her that she had never felt before, a hope that had blossomed out of the darkest of times. One evening, after a long day of work and volunteering, Ava stood in her kitchen, making dinner. The simple act of cooking brought her peace, the rhythm of the chopping, stirring, and seasoning grounding her in the present. She had found joy in the little things, the small, everyday moments that made up a life well lived. As the smell of dinner filled the apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from Matt. She had not heard from him in a while, and though they were no longer close, she had forgiven him in her own way. "Hey, Ava," the message read. "I just wanted to reach out. I know I've hurt you, and I can never take back what I did, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I hope you found the peace you deserve." Ava stared at the message for a moment. She had come so far since that day when Matt had revealed the truth to her. She had carried the weight of it for so long, but now, it no longer had power over her. She had found her own peace, and it was time to let go of the past completely. She typed out a simple response. "Thank you, Matt. I'm okay. I found my peace." She hit send, and for the first time in a long while, she felt no bitterness, no anger. She felt only relief. That night, as Ava sat down to a quiet dinner, she reflected on everything she had been through. She had lost, she had loved, and she had found her way back to herself. She had made promises and kept them, but most importantly, she had learned that the most important promise she could make was to herself. Ava had survived the storm, and now, she was standing in the light, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future would bring. Her heart was full, not because everything had been perfect, but because she had learned to live with the imperfections. And in that acceptance, she found peace.